for joining us, the Wealthy Retailer Podcast with your host, Dan Holman. Every episode, Dan dives into the retail headlines that matter to you, the independent retailer, covering topics ranging from retailer inventory, technology, marketing, retailers' questions, and more. The Wealthy Retailer Podcast is brought to you by Canadian Retail Solutions. Learn more at retailbycrs.com. And now, here's Dan Holman.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Wealthy Retailer Podcast. Here we are for the week of Wednesday. It's the week of Wednesdays, Rob.
Happy
April
hump
29th, my mom's birthday, April
Happy birthday,
29th.
Mom.
Yeah,
Nice.
Happy birthday, Ma.
Clearly, you got her a gift at least a month ago, and you're on top of things.
Totally done. It got delivered yesterday, the day
Nice.
before.
Right.
Yeah. Listen, I have... We've talked about this scheduling assistant that I have that reminds me of these important milestones in my life.
You're
And
probably old
birthdays
school,
are one of
Dan.
them things.
You had the old paperclip used to come up in the corner of your computer and remind you of things.
Yeah, here's your to-do list. Yeah.
Right on. Right on. My to-do list is to do more this week. I've sat through a couple speakers in the last week that I say the moons have aligned. Both of them talked about the same topic about Navy SEALs and the 40% rule.
Yeah.
And that when you think you've gone as far as you've gone, you really only have gone 40%. And so that's sure sticking in my brain of what we can do to keep going. Some good headlines this week. As always, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. We've got one that I like this, a story about finding your retail community and talks about, a little dating before you get married is always a good idea. One about retailers really focusing on it's time to move beyond this outdated business model. So really looking forward to your thoughts there. And, that last mile, we've talked lots about it, story why Canadian retailers must own the customer experience in that last mile. And I'd say that's safe to say it's beyond Canadians too, Dan. That's probably all retailers around the world.
Yep.
And another great question focused on merchandising tips. And I'm sure you've got some good stuff there. So some good stuff here this week, Dan.
Yeah, let's dig in and have a little fun.
Okay.
Let's see if we can't get at least 40% done.
Let's go past that 40% mark, Dan. I didn't want to say anything to you before. I really thought you were leaving stuff on the table. So let's have at her.
Let's get it.
This first story comes to us from the BerkshireEdge.com, talking about Great Barrington, a spot in Massachusetts where the secret to retail success in downtown. What is it? What are the things that they're doing right, and what stood out to you, Dan?
Well, this article, as you alluded to, from the Berkshire Edge in Great Barrington, small little town in Massachusetts. And they released this article last week that the headline, so appealing, what's the secret to retail success in downtown Great Barrington? Well, the secret to success in that downtown community isn't really any different than any other downtown community that exists in small town Canada or small town America, here in St. Albert. And despite market challenges and economic downturns that the pandemic sort of drove, Rob, this retail life in downtown Great Barrington is not just resilient, it's flourishing. And it didn't happen or isn't happening by chance. There's this combination of success strategies being deployed by both the retail entrepreneurs and the landlords in this downtown market. The two big factors for me that I sort of pulled out of this article were collaboration, number one, and number two, just as equally as important, I guess, is knowing the downtown consumer habits. So when I looked at, what am I seeing in collaboration here that I could be drawing on, it was really that the landlords have been flexible and forward thinking to keep spaces open using pop-ups. Steve Brooks, the pop-up expert, going to love this. And the power of pop-ups. And this downtown community really has thrived with some pop-ups. And this article showcases a few stores that have used this pop-up strategy and not just pop-up strategies, but month-to-month leases, meaning no empty storefronts. No empty storefronts means that people are going to continue coming downtown. And we've talked about the power of a pop-up. And this article showcases Andrea Westerlind and how she embraced the pop-up model for her outdoor store in Great Barrington. She did this after seeing opportunity rather than seeing this as a necessity. Okay. You know, I'm that guy, Rob. Put your hand up if you've ever opened a store out of necessity, not opportunity. You know, a long time ago, as we were growing our business,
interesting,
and we became challenged, we opened retail stores. We did it out of a necessity to create some top line revenue to help cover off, you know, to keep that fire burning. Okay. Well, this is the opposite. This is where Andrea comes in and sees opportunity. And she now has a permanent space there. And Andrea goes on to talk about how the landlords bent over backwards to make it happen for her and her store.
There's that dating before getting married thing we talked about.
Right. And that's what this is all about. It is about that pop-up and that dating and the testing in that market. And I'm going to touch on a little bit later here, the power of downtown today and the age-old trite downtown revitalization strategies of the past.
Yeah.
You know, don't mean shit in today's world. Today, it's about making sure that your storefronts, that your buildings are occupied, that give people a reason to go down there. And this kind of came out of, they quoted Robin Helfand. She's a board member with the Community Development Corporation of South Berkshire, and she owns Robin's Candies. Been on Main Street in this downtown community, 14 years or thereabouts. I think she started in 2007. And she goes on to say that their downtown needs walkability or the ability to park your car and move around. And isn't that the same argument we hear from every downtown community? Listen, it needs to be walkable. We need to have full storefronts. We need to have food and beverage. We need to have this multi-presentation because Robin goes on to talk about in this article about her customer. Her typical customer is batching. New term for us, maybe new catchphrase. They're batching, meaning they're visiting their doctor, their lawyer, their hairstylist, as well as retail. And
dentist, then the candy store.
Yeah, dentist, then head over to the candy store.
Just like our hometown.
Not the other way around. Yeah, it's exactly like that.
Pick your order.
And this, Rob, is a shifting consumer habit. We're leaving the house. Right? Now, depending on where you're listening from, maybe you're not leaving your house right now in Canada, but when you do, you're batching your activities. You're pulling things together to be as time efficient. We've talked about time being our biggest competitor, in the past, and the consumer is making better time management decisions and batching their activities together. And that's part of the attraction of being in that downtown community, that she is batching, and it does need to be walkable. And this speaks to knowing, her habits and having a better understanding of our consumer habits and how we need to interact with them.
Yep.
We've referenced a lot of studies over the last 6 months that demonstrate how shopping habits are changing and how the consumer is driving more and more and more to the independent store, to the small strip center, to the boutique environment, to not risk their life going in a mall. Right? And so there's great opportunity here. And for our retailers, we have to be looking forward and asking ourselves, where is this next opportunity? It doesn't always knock on your door. Sometimes you have to tap it on the shoulder.
I like the, love that term batching.
Batching.
And, we've talked lots about collaboration too, Dan. And I would suggest probably most of that conversation has been like-minded retailers but when you think of batching in that model, all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe I should be paying more attention to how many people are going to see that dentist each day,
right,
or the doctor around the corner, and that's not your obvious collaboration from a retailer standpoint. But when you embrace that batching approach, geez, I better go say hello to them and make sure that they know our awesome little shop is just around the corner, because they might be a great influencer of our business.
Right. And that, collaboration, that community over competition strategy pulls people together. And it's not pulling like businesses together, it's pulling like business minds together.
Awesome.
Does the lawyer, does the accountant, does the doctor, need a new patient? Maybe, maybe not. But he's plenty happy to see us thrive in his community that makes it easy and more frequent visits in that downtown core. He wants to be that. A lot of doctors are very entrepreneurial, right? And so they do understand the power of supporting that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yep.
And this is a good example of, Great Barrington and how they're thriving. Not by chance either, by design.
Talk about walkability, and you mentioned parking too, Dan, and COVID's driven a big change of getting people outside.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious, your thoughts of that, shutting streets down, obviously kneecaps you a little on the parking accessibility, but does create a significant walkability to the area. Are you seeing more of this? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Rob, even in your little town here, the power of what happens at Saturday, during market time, June, like Father's Day to through September, when that market pops up on the streets and they close the streets, and it becomes this very walkable downtown with, sufficient parking all around. There is places to park. There are parking.
Figures out a way.
It just
magically 15,000 people figured out how to find a fairly close spot,
decent parking spot. And everybody wants to see that continue to happen. And so, not only do we need to have the ability to park easily, but walkable. We are a more active society today. Some of us, I'm not maybe one of them, more active, but we've become this more active society, and getting out and going for a walk is part of our therapy. And walking, that physical therapy, along with the emotional therapy that comes from spending time in retail stores, is blended together really nicely. And so we are definitely seeing, perhaps not, shut the street down, although I would love to see some of that, and allow lots of cross street cruising. And we're not far from that. If we could have one or two more restaurants in our downtown, we could get enough patios out on the street to shut the street down and, be able to walk from one place to the other, and stores, and, be able to maneuver a little bit.
I've said for a long time too, like, you do it and have full faith. 5 out of 100 people are going to lose their minds. They're going to scream, because their only goal is to drive through that road from point A to point B as quick as they can. They're not stopping for nothing.
Right.
And if you listen to them to drive your decision, you'll never do something that
you'll never take the risk.
Simply isn't going to, probably 95 out of 100 people are going to love that decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk about, looking at different opportunities as you move forward. Our next story comes from retaildive.com. Dan talks about it's time to move beyond outdated business models. So what were some of the things here that stood out at you?
So this was a guest post on Retail Dive by NK Tripathi. Trip is his nickname. Long retail history in C-level positions. I think it was TJX and Macy's, and so he knows of where he speaks. And his sort of top 5 things that we need to re-examine in retail right now, perhaps not as relevant to the independent, but I like to think, the bigger the retailer, the more opportunity there is for me, a small retailer, to learn something, even if I can take a small piece of it. And so these top 5 things that Tripp shared, number 1 was consumer delivery model. Is she shopping with you and your competitors online, in your brick and mortar, or both? How is she shopping and buying? Asking yourself, re-examining, what is my consumer delivery model? And if she's an online customer, and I say, examine in your own store and in your competition store. How is she shopping with you? Where is she spending? And that sort of speaks to his number 2, shipping and delivery to customers. How are you shipping? Should we be contracting it out? Should we handle it in-house? There are some great references to stores and remove your fridge or end your fridge or kill your fridge delivery services that are delivering within 15 minutes, in their downtown core on basket laden bicycles. Yep. They've taken delivery on themselves. And this number 2 that Tripp highlighted was really understanding your shipping and your delivery. Number 3 for Tripp was supply chain. Right. And recognizing that our supply chain is challenged and will continue to be this way for some time means that retailers need to look at new supply opportunities as well as the changing desires of their consumers. He's buying some different things today than historically, and we need to understand how we can impact their desire, influence their desire, feed their desire by changing our supply opportunity, by looking to different supply chain opportunities, if you will.
Cool.
His number 4 was brick and mortar store experience. And the question you ask yourself is, how many stores do we need? How do we need to change them to better entice and inspire customers to shop with us? Do they need to be a hybrid of retail showcasing and fulfillment? And really understanding, what does brick and mortar look like? And I think Tripp is maybe a little bit heavily weighted on the power of e-com and the migration to e-com. I'm going to tell you that we're going to still see for the next 24 months all these huge online powers that became stronger and stronger in the last 18 months continue to open brick and mortar stores. They know that that's a way to capture their audiences in that brick and mortar store. And moreover, these stores become a marketing channel versus a distribution or selling channel. Right? It's the way to capture. And so we've got to be changing the way we deliver experience in our B&M stores. Last, number 5 for him, we've talked about this before. It's management and executive talent, and retailers need to revisit their recruitment strategies. There is no longer an old boys or old girls club where top retail talent has to come from within that retail sector.
Right.
And this philosophy, Rob, shouldn't just apply to management positions, but across a retailer's entire organization. Right now, retailers, big and small, should be looking for team members that are in other sectors. Sectors like technology, hospitality, and even mainstream manufacturing. Those sectors have some of the best talent available. And truthfully, we could stand a little change in the way we're doing retail today. And I picked those 3 sectors for really specific reasons, Rob. I mean, technology, obviously, I need to bring in a technical mind. If I had 100 retailers in the room, I'd be lucky to get 2 of them to put their hand up to say, I got it figured out.
Their comfort behind that, yeah.
Yeah, we need to embrace this technology that's going to help us get beyond your 40%, Rob. When you feel like you can't do more, technology is going to help us do some more. And we've got to embrace that and bring in technical minds. The other thing is hospitality. And I think you might remember we had Bruce Kirkland on from Lexus of Edmonton on our podcast last year. And Bruce talked about his number 1 recruitment strategy was hospitality, because people that come from hospitality are born and bred to serve, right? And that's what we want to look for. Yep. People that their only hope.
That's a guy selling high ticket items, and he wanted more experience from the hospitality industry.
That's a guy
than the car business
that goes to the Earl's Training Center to recruit, great salespeople, great ambassadors for his dealership. But he went to hospitality because they're born and bred to put a smile on your face. That's what they do. They serve above all else. And retailers need to do a better job of that. I don't give a shit how many retail stores you've worked in. I don't care that you were the best seller in 25 stores. If you don't have the right personality set, if you don't have the right value set, you're not going to be successful here. And hospitality tends to be more catering, and the consumer wants that today. And then the last thing I talked about there was that mainstream manufacturing, which there's no better example of systems defining outcomes than manufacturing, mainstream manufacturing today. Do it like this and this is what happens. It is a bit of an assembly line to get a consistent product out, and bringing someone in with that, ISO strategy or ISO mindset can be powerful in a retail store.
Yep. Well, you're really, taking that sports analogy of defining the different positions on your team and not getting, I like how it just a really good reminder to just don't be so retail focused. There's so many components to the business now that there's such great opportunity to, like I say, this is my third line left winger, right? This isn't my first line center. That we've got that already, but those are great.
This podcast is brought to you by Canadian Retail Solutions. We've been empowering retailers across North America for 30 years with the latest in point-of-sale technology, best-in-class support, merchandise intelligence with open-to-buy planning, and much more. CRS has the retail solution to help take your retail business to the next level of success. Visit retailbycrs.com to learn more. Remember, Canadian Retail Solutions exists to help make you, the independent retailer, better.
Okay. Boy, we talked about this lots, and it's not going away. It's a super important topic. Story from retailinsider.com about why Canadian retailers must own the customer experience in the last mile. Dan.
The last mile of delivery. Man, why do we keep coming back to this topic, Rob? Because it's important, and we have not figured it out yet. And George Minakakis, founder of Inception Retail, really intelligent retail mind. He's a standing member of another great retail podcast called The Business of Retail. So don't be afraid to go and check those guys out. There are some really fabulous people on that podcast, including Craig Patterson from Retail Insider. And this article George authored is in this week's Retail Insider, or in one of this week's Retail Insider newsletters. And it was about the last mile of delivery and how owning this last mile doesn't necessarily mean you have to own the logistics of the last mile, but you need to understand, that last mile, and how owning the last mile, gives you the ability to better respond to how your product is delivered and presented to customers, and making assumptions that the customer's past experience with your physical space isn't enough. It won't be enough. And they will not just understand that this is part of the process. They'll come to expect more. And if you believe that they'll accept it, as George says, it's a mistake. It's a flat out mistake. We need to be better. And George goes on to talk about how the entrance of new competition in our place, in our sector, in the form of marketplaces. I think we talked about marketplaces last week or the week before, as the Hudson's Bay is launching their marketplace. It's crowding the digital world right now, and it's going to make it confusing, continue to make it confusing for the customer on where they're actually buying from. Right. And by you owning that last mile of delivery, by you having the ability to control how your product is presented to a customer and ensuring that it's on point when it's delivered, is the greatest opportunity right now. And George states it's retail's next big challenge, this last mile. You see, we've always talked about the last mile of delivery from a logistical perspective,
right,
not a presentation perspective. So I really like the way George took this article and said, hey, let's get our ducks in a row here. Let's make sure that our presentation of our product to our customer during that last mile is fully controllable.
And getting beyond that last mile, it's been framed up so much as the delivery component, right?
Yeah.
Versus I'll just call it the relationship component of that last mile. And you brought up the Bay.
Yes.
They're trying to inject themselves, and effectively, what is the last mile of that relationship? Which is why we'll jump in on the delivery side too. Some just great reminders and points for those independent retailers out there I like too, where you don't necessarily have to be doing it all, but I don't know, maybe it's the 5 W's of the last mile. You better, the who, what, where, when, why,
Yeah.
you better know all that
You
as it
should know it
relates
all.
to that last mile.
And we've talked about this before on the logistical side. You don't have to own the logistics. You just have to set it up properly. You just have to know. And whether you're using Uber or some other lightning delivery service, or you're delivering at the end of the day in your community, or you're using Canada Post or USPS, when that parcel is open, when that box is open, it has to exude you, right? And that's
100%.
part of owning that last mile. Yeah. That they know where that product came from.
And we've talked about that before, like just the power of that moment, right? And how it can be seized upon or totally lost. Like,
or
man,
completely lost.
You did nothing there. And it just blew such a wonderful opportunity to really make that connection. Yep. Okay, Dan, speaking of connections, we got connections with those retailers out there. They're sending you questions. We got a great one this week. What's the topic for this week?
Well, so this actually came from Leslie, and Leslie sent me a message and said, "Hey Dan," it wasn't a question, it was a request, and so just said, "Hey Dan, it would be great if you could share some tips for merchandising on your podcast." And so this came in a few weeks ago, and I kind of tabled it, Rob, because I was in the process of building a merchandising webinar for a small apparel buying group that a couple of our retailers belong to. So as I was building out this presentation, I kept, pulling things aside and saying, I'm going to send this, or I'm going to talk about this. So I did pull out 6 key areas that we need to highlight, adapt, adjust, or readdress in our stores this year. And these are somewhat sequential. So I'll just kind of rhyme off the 6 of them. So number 1 has to be about your department, class, and subclass structure in your store. So let's just go back to the data that we have and come up with a way to better mine that data. And using a DCS structure, a department, class, and subclass structure, it allows us to better segregate our inventory and realign our structures to follow her purchasing habits, and then become better buyers or better merchants. So we really have to have better segregation. It's not enough to say, I've got a tops class. There's not a lot of opportunity in the overarching tops category. There's a ton of opportunity inside some subcategorization there, or making, novelty tees a true category that you go chase after. And you see, this is one of the biggest challenges, Rob, that retailers have when it comes to merchandise analysis or merchandising, the act of merchandising a store, is they're not following the right path. They're following, gut and feel and vendor instead of science, and allowing that bit of science that comes from data, that structure or segregation, to steer sort of where they're buying. So number 1, let's get a really good class structure in your store. Number 2 is planning. Right now, retailers need to be planning their businesses forward, resisting and retraining themselves to stop freaking looking backwards. Making a comparison to last year or to the year before right now is an absolute mistake. We need to start looking forward and get on a plan that looks at opportunity in those chunks we talked about, that DCS structure, while mitigating risk. We also need a tool, Rob, that has the ability to help drive us forward, right? That quickly identifies trends in our store. We've got to see trends at a class level, not at a vendor or bigger level. We've got to be breaking things down, and planning your drive home is imperative today. This is a detour-ridden, obstacle-ridden retail path that you're on, and you've got to plan your route. And that comes by looking forward and not looking backward, and certainly making comparisons.
Yeah. Well, I've always enjoyed too that when you and your team, when you're talking about planning, looking forward, it's not just with that one relationship of that one, one retailer. You're bringing a lot to the table that when it comes to the planning that you can really help in that regard.
Yeah. And when we talk about planning, I mean, with our pals at Management One, when we use that Retail Orbit tool, it really does look at a lot of different factors than just you. And really, I was thinking about vision planning, not the actual act of planning, but that is totally on point. You've got to use those tools to better. And Rob, this again speaks to efficiency. How do I efficiently plan my business forward? How do I create more time in my day, not more work in my day? And being on a plan allows that to happen. Number 3 for me, as we're moving through this bit of a sequential look at being a great merchandiser, is relationship management. And we need better relationships with our vendors and our distributors. These relationships must be built on trust, accountability, and open, consistent communication. There needs to be metrics in place to know when we're winning and when we're not. And this, I say it again, trust. You got to trust each other. You got to trust that you have each other's best interest in mind. You have to be accountable and hold each other accountable to the metrics that you've established. And it needs to be metric driven. It's the pure black and white. I don't care how great of a guy you are. If the product sucks, if I'm not getting my turns, if I'm not getting my margin, if I'm not getting marked down dollars from you, we're gonna have to separate. So much for marriage here, pal. We're done. And having that consistent, clear communication, concise communication with your vendors and your distributors really does treat them like a partner instead of how most of us have been treating them, enemies. These guys are allies, and communication is how that maybe keeps them closer. Nice. Number 4 for me, and this is something that I totally learned several years ago. I had never really talked about freshness before joining the Management One family. It was my aha moment when I very first looked at my very first plan with them. My aha moment was, shit, they've got a way to measure how fresh a store is or how fresh your inventory is. And this is the most ignored factor in retail stores today. And it's imperative that retailers do away with these bullshit excuses that keep them from buying less more often. And it is just bullshit excuses. It's I can't, it's discount driven, it's I have to front load it, I'm too far away. It's just all bullshit excuses. They're not the reasons that we buy that way. We buy heavy, we buy from too few people because it's easier. Let's come up with a way to drive freshness into our store by buying less more often and paying attention to how fresh your store is. I mean, it is literally simple math, man. It's how much have I received in the last 30 days as a percentage of my entire inventory right now. It's that simple. And when we're pushing that freshness number higher and higher and higher, we start to feed into this belief that nobody wants last year's shit, man. Yep. And the fresher our inventory, the more often we're going to see her. Retailers also, Rob, need to, spend more time rotating their displays and re-merchandising their displays to showcase products in many, many different ways. And a rotation strategy in their store helps us to give slower moving merchandise a chance to sell in those hot spots. Man, freshness is about not just about buying less more often. It's also about circulating in your store. Some stores are sensory overload, and she can't see everything.
Right.
And this has happened to every retailer that's ever listened to our podcast.
Rotation. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody walks in the door and says, "Oh my God, I love this. When did this come in?" And you're embarrassed to say last year or last month or not last month, but last season. It's just how you've re-merchandised the store that brings things to the forefront and puts things in the hot spot that maybe are slower moving.
We've reinvigorated this item to the front.
Yeah. Yeah. I've given it a fresh perspective.
On the fresh percentage, Dan, you talk about like on a month. Is it monthly or is like, seasonal, the quarterly approach?
Yeah. So depending on the vertical that you're in, the faster you turn product, the higher that freshness should be over 30 days. We really like to look at freshness at 30, 60, and 90 days.
Okay.
90 days being that rolling season. How fresh is my inventory over the last 3 months? Well, if it's not 100% fresh, I'm never going to get 4 turns out of my store.
Yeah.
Right? If it's not 100% fresh, let's think about this. Think about it this way. If I have a 50% freshness rate in my store for the last 90 days, that means half of my inventory has arrived in the last 90, and half of my inventory is from January or before. What season am I in now?
Yeah.
I'm in spring. I'm in the throes of spring. And more than half of my inventory landed in my store before January, which probably makes it what kind of goods? Winter goods.
Right.
Right? You want to get top dollar for your product, which
Yep.
is the next point.
Yep.
Pricing and markdowns. We really need to price everything for what it will sell for right now. We've got to get off this escalating markdown kick that inspires her to wait, especially in our fashion stores. So when I say inspires her to wait, I mean, if you're taking gradual markdowns, 10 off today, 20 off tomorrow, 30 off next week, why should she buy it today? You're slowing down her buying habit. Price stuff to sell right now. Every time you look at a product in your store, you're asking yourself, what will she pay for this? And that better be the price that's on it. And if it's 50% off today, then at least market it today and get it gone. And this idea, of getting off this kick is because, Rob, she is way more likely to purchase a full price item today from a buy now, wear now strategy than she ever used to. We need to be more strategic in pairing items together to diminish the need for end of season markdowns and be hypercritical of what we're buying and be okay to fail fast. Be okay failing, but doing it fast. And this whole pricing and markdown, component of being a great merchant really is that simple. Price it for what it's going to sell for. I mean, margin dollars come from selling, not pricing, right? Cash comes from selling goods, not pricing goods. All right. Be really good at how you price them and be hyper focused on what your markdown strategy is. Markdowns are an essential ingredient, Rob, in retail. I'm just telling you that our experience in the last 4 months has been that she is more apt to buy a full price item than a markdown item. So come up with better ways to reward her, bundle things together so that you're not red penning everything. Create, BOGOs and buy 2, get the 3rd and some other strategy where it doesn't feel like you're red penning your store. Right? There's a piece of the audience that really does want to buy from us at full price. They do want to help us. We've been highlighted in this world, and there are people in our community that want to come in and not ask for a discount. And then lastly, for me, cash flow. And if cash is king, Rob, and we've said this for a long time, if cash is king, then cash flow is our queen. And cash flow has always been the biggest nemesis to our retailers. And gaining a better understanding of your cash flow drivers, those levers in cash flow, is step 1 in alleviating this chronic issue that retailers have today. Our stores need a blend of fast-moving products that complement our slower-moving goods or our front-loaded seasonal buys to keep cash rolling in the door. And maintaining this strategy that sees you buying less more often is one of the cash flow drivers in your store. All right. And cash flow is the biggest contributor to a good merchandising strategy. And not making decisions on your floor because you need cash, but making decisions on your floor because you have cash makes you a wealthy retailer.
Yeah, right on. Well, thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, Leslie, this was
She
great.
just
It
asked
wasn't
for
the question.
sunsets.
It
This
was a
was
Dan,
great.
you got to do this. And I love it. And listen, if anybody else has a request or a question or something that they want us to dig into on the podcast, just shoot an email to dan@thewealthyretailer.com and we will get it on our list.
Right on. And if you haven't yet, folks, head to retailbycrs.com for the newsletter. Everything that we talk about this week, we've got a link to that story as well. There's always a few extra things that I know Dan finds interesting, but we just don't quite have enough time to discuss, but we want to make sure that you have access to it. A few more this week, one talking about, new retail consumer behavior, some interesting data out of that story. Another 5 industry trends that helping shape the new retail environment in Canada, and 5 practical tips for small businesses making that, it starts with little steps, but they get bigger and bigger, making those steps towards e-commerce. So I'm sure someone listening today is thinking that, and what's the path to getting there? And well, it starts with step 1 and go.
Step 1.
So yeah, totally.
Make that call today that you'll be glad you made a year from now.
Great job, Dan. Folks, if you haven't, hey, be sure to give us a like, a follow on whatever platform you're listening to. And Dan, I'll let you take us home here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Be sure to head over to retailbycrs.com. Clearly, my screwdriver's getting to me already, Rob. Get over to retailbycrs.com. Sign up for that weekly newsletter. We will have all of these articles plus some other good stuff buried in that newsletter, or available in that newsletter for you. Lots of good stuff at your fingertips, that you can share. And hope everybody has an awesome retail week.
Happy retail.